Hi there. Welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. In this podcast, I interview successful business leaders and industry experts to help you grow your business. I truly believe that sometimes single insight can completely change your business directions and allow you to achieve your business goals. In this episode, my guest is founder of Airtight Management, CEO of Boot Camps and Entrepreneurship University online training programs. As a business leader, he has helped various companies such as Thomson Financial Services, Contour Enterprises to build their business strategy and scale them to achieve their business goals. He has also built his own companies such as A Plus America, Technology for Kids, and Home View Reality, and scaled them and sold them later on. And now he's doing the same for other businesses. He's helping business leaders to develop their business strategy and scale their companies to achieve their business goals. He's a consultant, he's a coach, and he's the author of several online training programs and CEO boot camps. We had a discussion around the various different topics on the business growth and business scaling. Bob shared insights on the challenges and opportunities around raising capitals and scaling businesses. He also shared many management strategies to deal with the unexpected operational challenges when you're trying to grow your company. Bob is somebody who has, as a business executive, built a business strategy and scaled these companies. And also he has built his own companies and scaled these companies and sold them later on. So there's so much knowledge and experience that Bob has that he shared during our discussion. I enjoyed my discussion with Bob and I learned so much from him. And I hope also you will also enjoy my discussion with him as well and take something that you could apply to your business to grow your company as well. So if you like these discussions, don't forget to give me a thumbs up. Until next time, please welcome my guest, Bob Norton. Hi guys, welcome to Business Leadership Podcast. Today my guest is Bob Norton. Bob, you've been helping out business leaders to scale businesses, to manage business or run organization, many different areas. So, I'm looking forward to learning from you, looking forward to a discussion. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, glad to be here and happy and excited to answer all your questions.
Okay, let's go ahead. So walk us through about what do you see for last few years? Some of those challenges business owners, business leaders are up against. From your clients or the people you're working with, where do you see some of those biggest challenges that came across for last few years?
Well, right now, obviously, we're beginning to enter a little bit of a recession, and with the Silicon Valley Bank fallout, combined with a lot of venture capitalists are going out of business. And, currently there's a lot of stress on the capital markets, but raising capital is always a problem. It's been pretty easy for the last few years, but I think it started to slide down rapidly. I think a challenge that every good business owner faces all the time is, hiring and finding and keeping good people. And of course, one of the solutions of that we can talk about later is educating them and give them the opportunity to grow in their career and develop and have, a real career path in mind instead of just a job. Marketing is continuing to be a bigger challenge. I think anyone that markets online knows that the cost of pay-per-click has gone up and social media is getting more fragmented, and content generation, of course, is a marketing strategy for a lot of people, but, we literally have trillions of posts out there now, and it's hard to get through that noise. One of the solutions of that, of course, is narrowing your targeting, which is sometimes counterintuitive for entrepreneurs that need to start, with a market entry that is niched and very focused to reduce their marketing costs and to touch the same customer with a message, 11 times, has been the historical average, for consumer marketing. It might be a little less for business marketing, but it's a different, B2B is different, obviously. But so I think that rising cost of marketing, as well as the rising complexity, if you want to do online marketing now, you probably need 5 to 7 skill sets. From people, which is sort of bringing back agencies. Agencies went through a lot of turmoil about 20 years ago. And, a lot of them are forming around digital marketing now because I think about half of the spend we crossed over the 50% point, where half of the marketing spend is in the digital arena today, as opposed to traditional print and TV and newspaper and things, which are still there, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
What's another big challenge? I mean, I think it's always a challenge to worry about differentiation and innovation. I
Mm-hmm.
love Peter Drucker's quote, the father of management, who says, a company really has two major goals, and that is innovation and marketing. And I think that's a very deep thing that people should think about, because that's where the creativity is needed. That's where you create the difference. And,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at a company like Tesla, it's essentially got a zero marketing budget and no sales budget, because its products are totally unique and were positioned so far from the rest of the market. So the more innovation you have, the less you need to spend on sales and marketing, which
Mm-hmm.
can become, a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then you take those extra profits and you feed it back into more or better product development and innovation, and
Mm-hmm.
you spiral up that way. So, driving
Gotcha.
innovation and understanding that that's a cultural thing, it's not a one and done. It's a constant improvement, and it's not just in product development. Companies should be trying to innovate in sales, marketing, product development, operations, finance, in every area of the business they can. Lots of people approach innovation as if that only happens in one department, but
Mm-hmm.
it's really a cultural thing. And the culture has to accept failure, because 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 innovations will fail. And so you have to try a lot of small things at a low cost. And then, of course, you invest more in the ones that show promise, and, step that up to a bigger prototype and a bigger spend,
Gotcha.
and a market entry strategy that provides, real traction from the market. So, I
Mm-hmm.
could go on and on, but those are the first 3 or 4 that I think are timeless. I mean, and
Yeah.
always things that CEOs and entrepreneurs have to be thinking about.
So those are really good point, very interesting ones. So let's just break it down a little bit. Let's start from raising capital, Bob. So what are some of those challenges? So let's talk about it. Is it because I know we recently news that banks are struggling, or governments holding money. So what are some of those challenges there? Where people are up against? Is it just people because of uncertainty they just freeze capital that nobody wants to invest, or is it simply just uncertainty and just not availability number of banks we up against?
Well, I'd say it's both. I mean, clearly the banks are now looking at their balance sheets to make sure they don't have the same problem that Silicon Valley Bank had. If memory serves, they created about a $1.8 billion hole
Yeah.
in their balance sheet by losing money on long-term bonds, because when you hold long-term bonds and interest rates go up, the price of those bonds go down because the yield is lower, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of banking 101 in some ways. And so they basically bet the farm that interest rates would not go up much, or they didn't think about it, which would probably be mismanagement. I don't know what the truth is, but either way, they got caught with their pants down. And I suspect there are hundreds of other banks that are going to have the same problem. You could blame that on government, because government has never raised interest rates so much in a single year in
Yeah.
the history of having the Federal Reserve. And so obviously they weren't necessarily thinking about driving a loss in the bank portfolios, which drives their need for capital and capitalization, and ultimately, of course, caused a run on the banks. So that's certainly a problem. Interest rates and borrowing going up is a big problem for consumers. I've seen interest rates, I've heard the average is about 20% now. And I think
Mm-hmm.
some credit cards are charging 29%, which used to
Mm-hmm.
be a felony, by the way. It was considered usury. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what legislation made that okay, but that's certainly going to put a lot of pressure on the consumer economy, which is, they say, 66% of the overall economy, as opposed to the business economy is about a third.
Mm-hmm.
So those two things are joined at the hip, and when one hurts, it's like the United States gets a cold, the whole world economy, has to go to bed and have a
Yeah.
flu because it's a contagion of that. I think that although no one sounded the alarm and it's a little hiding in the background, the venture capital industry as a whole is in trouble again. It's basically repeating the dot-com bust in some ways. Many venture capitalists are leaving their firms, winding down firms. Obviously, they have a commitment and they have to keep, managing their current portfolio companies, and they have some capital, but their yields have just not been as big. And of course, now that's become so much more visible, because when the tide goes out, you see what's on the bottom here.
Yeah.
And that, frankly, I don't think venture capitalists in general are that good at picking companies because they usually lack operational experience. They got an MBA in finance and they knew the right people and they started as an associate crunching numbers and they worked their way up to be a partner, but they never really ran a company. I remember when I first got venture capital back in the early 1990s, Marquette Venture Partners was one of the companies that was put out as having one of the best yields. And they were all the partners were operating CEOs. And I'm a believer that you have to have that level of breadth of experience to model a company and its vision in your head and understand all the strategic and implementation, tactically of those things and how to hire the right people. So I think, CEOs in residence and CEOs that want to be partners that have built companies are better at picking companies than people that got an MBA in finance,
Well, at least they know how the dynamics of people works, right? What do they have to do from people's standpoint to get that company, execute the strategy, whatever they build, right?
Yeah, it's all about people. I think people overweight the domain experience. And we have plenty of examples like Lou Gershner at IBM, who came out of consumer packaged goods and turned IBM around, which was a technology company. And, it amazes me that you see these silly requirements in a job description when someone's hiring that says, you got to know Excel or you got to have 10 years in this industry. I think, it takes 10 or 20 years to build experience in, management and leadership and vision and strategy and all these other things that require deep wisdom. And a lot of those things can be learned in a day or a week or a month and ought to be brought to the table by the rest of the team in terms of domain experience in the industry anyway. Running a business is all about people, no matter what. It's people, it's having a vision with strategy, it's having a why, if you're familiar with the Simon Sinek, why concept that makes people emotionally bonded to the results and the objectives that they're trying to achieve with the company. CEOs got to think about the fact that no one wants to get out of bed at 7 a.m. every day and go to work to make them rich. Yeah. They're doing it for another reason, and you've got to give them that reason and, and make a contribution to society, especially the younger people. They say they're focused on that, but, I'm sure most of them, if they could get a 30% higher salary in a company that isn't as socially responsible, they'd probably take that. It's amazing what a paycheck for ethics, right?
Yeah. Was that this creating this for the skill set you just laid out, Bob? Was that challenged? Some of those skills that were challenged during this last couple of years with the COVID, that how to create a culture, how to build that collaborative environment, workplace, all those the culture you want to build. Was that some of those items were challenged during the last few years when you work in remotely, you're not working in an office and you in a hybrid environment?
Certainly the shift to virtual working, which was already happened before COVID, but was probably tripled, by COVID, is an adjustment for companies, not having conversations at the water cooler and, visual, communications and body language. They say 15% is the word. So if you're working on Slack or you're working through email and that's the only way you communicate with people, that's missing 85% of the things that come across from visuals and body language and the intonation in your voice and what it means. This is why you never have difficult conversations by email and text, because
Mhm.
you can't soften it with the emotion and with the empathy that's required when you're having the more difficult conversations, right? So yeah, I think that's a huge shift. I kind of stand with some of the companies that are bringing people back into the office. I think that Steve Jobs, both at Apple and at Pixar and others, had the right philosophy that when creativity is needed, collaboration is needed. And
Yeah.
sometimes you just need to lock 5 people in a room and have them, write a comedy skit or create a movie or design a software product. And that's so much higher bandwidth, and it causes bonding, that it has a lot of value. That said, there are lots of jobs that are perfectly done with, telecommuting, and, the tools that we have today, Zoom, like we're using right now, and all the workforce flow and process management tools you have,
Mhm.
certainly make a lot of jobs very good that way. And, the savings of an hour or two of commute and the travel time and the gas and everything else. I think a lot of companies will wind up with a hybrid, arrangement where 1 or 2 days they're supposed to be in the office and the rest is virtual. But there'll be plenty of jobs that can be 100% virtual all the time. And,
Yeah.
you can do the Tim Ferriss travel around the world on a slow world tour and
Yeah.
spend a month in every country and still do your job as long as you watch the time, and don't make it too difficult for your employer, right?
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk about the training, what you just mentioned. One of the piece, you have a lot of training material. You have a lot of content on, you have a lot of training programs that you built over the years. So where do the people get stuck? There's so much training available. That we have so many, expert like you. There's so much wisdom available. So where do they, when it comes to training their leaders or training their management, where do people get stuck about when they're trying to take a company on a growth path?
Just for context, for the audience that hasn't reviewed all my website stuff, I've run the CEO Boot Camp since 2004 and graduated thousands of CEOs and entrepreneurs from there, and run it on multiple continents and stuff like that. But as a result of COVID, I was going to run a CEO boot camp in April of 2020. And of course,
Yeah.
that became both imprudent and illegal here around Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
And so I wound up locking myself in my green screen studio and adding a lot of training, and went from having about 20 courses to having over 40 courses now.
Wow.
Now, I think our education system is in deep trouble. And I mean that at the K to 12 and the universities. To touch on wokeness, I mean, the overcorrection for self-esteem that's happening in our education system has gone overboard. And it is basically teaching people, just show up and you get a trophy. That's basically sort of a socialist model. And when they get out in the workforce, they learn, hey, I don't get a trophy for showing up. I've actually got to work here. So that's a
Yeah.
big problem. Another problem is that people think education is free. And I think university education is way overpriced at this point. And Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and lots of other, multiple billionaires, are attacking the same problem, that our college degrees aren't designed to prepare people for specific titles as some technical colleges are and things like that. So that's a problem we have to address. But in terms of free education on YouTube, you're going to get what you pay for. Most of that is embedded with all kinds of marketing. I've seen people on there giving courses in, Peter Drucker's Management by Objective, and it's very clear they haven't got a clue and they've never used it. They're just repeating what they heard or read or studied. The chat GPT thing and AI coming in where, anyone can, in theory, get a good answer to a question that spans lots of the data and postings on the internet, is
Mhm.
both super powerful and dangerous, because it's going to explode sort of the fake content that was created by AI instead of someone with wisdom. I have a diagram in my CEO boot camp that I called the wisdom pyramid, which is sort of the same concept that later was published in the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, one of my favorite authors. That it's called the Wisdom Pyramid, and it talks about data, knowledge, or information, knowledge, and then getting to wisdom. And it's sort of the same idea that, knowing a fact is not worth anything. Knowing a fact or a lot of facts in context of a domain starts to be worth something. That's knowledge, right? And that's kind of the extent and the limit of what AI and sometimes academic professors can do, because they've never actually done it in the real world oftentimes, right? But wisdom comes only from experience. And that's what Malcolm Gladwell calls in his model unconscious competence, which is basically neuroplasticity in your brain has wired a special supercomputer area in your brain for that complex art. And so that's where the title of the book comes from, because you can do, after that 5 years or more of experience, interestingly, we use the exact same length of 5 years of full-time work to become an expert in something, which is enough to rewire the brain. It really requires that number of years. But then you have an answer to something in the blink of an eye, because your unconscious supercomputer that just does that thing comes up with an answer, and it sort of intuitively.
Yeah, so he was talking about 10,000 hours, right? Malcolm Gladwell, he was talking about 10,000 hours.
Which is 5 years of full-time work. And historically, for centuries, has been what an apprentice is, right? When you were doing glass blowing and horseshoeing and ironworks and all of these, crafts and arts, you generally had to do a 5-year apprenticeship under a master before you graduated and, opened your own shop and became your own master. So, now with dozens of studies and probably hundreds of tools on the brain and neuroscience and neuroplasticity, we're beginning to understand why we've done this the same way for hundreds, if not thousands of years, because it takes 5 years to become a true expert in something. It's the same thing as what sports athletes call being in the zone, right? Because they're not thinking about all the things they're doing to control their body when they're throwing a pass on the football field. That's all. They call it muscle memory, but it's really your brain firing the right neurons in the right order, because those neurons have been refreshed to do certain patterns, through enormous amounts of practice, right? Ask Brady.
There you go. So you've been doing a boot camp for CEOs about for years. What do you think some of the trait that the CEOs have? Like, what does it make successful CEO compared to the other one? There's a lot of programs you run. I'm trying to find out, to scale a company, what mindset do you need?
I just published an article on that, which was I think it was called the top 10 or 11 things that are sort of the requirements to be a successful entrepreneur and CEO. And I don't know that I can remember them all off the top of my head, but we can probably put a link to that blog article with this video. Perseverance is way up there. You've got to understand that getting to success means lots of trial and error. So you've got to have the perseverance to continue. I think you need critical thinking skills. You need to be able to know when to listen to other people and when to reject their theories, because they don't have the expertise in that area. We all hear both the thing, you must be ready to pivot and you must stick to your guns, right? And those two things would fight each other, apparently, right? So how do you know when to follow one versus the other, right? So I define what I call the vision pie, which has at the core your vision or your value added for the marketplace. And I think that should be stable and never change. I mean, that's the Bill Gates saying, I want to create the software that's going to allow a PC to be on every desk, right? Which sounded crazy back in 1977 or 78. whenever he founded Microsoft, right? But of course, now some of us have 2 and 3 computers on our desk, and we carry one in our pocket. And I hear we've got 100 of them in some cars, right? So it doesn't sound so crazy now, but that core idea, the true north of your strategy, which is overlapping with your why, and the famous sentence from Steve Jobs that overlaps with that is the genius of the person that compared, when they were studying the energy used by human beings and other animals, and into that study, they put a human being with a bike. And so Steve Jobs talked about how the personal computer was the bicycle for the mind, right? That totally transformed, because a human with a bike would beat any animal in terms of the amount of energy that's needed to move a mile or 5 miles, right? And so the human being didn't win, compared to cheetahs and other animals. But when you give them a bike, or of course a car, they're gonna win that race every time, right? So the tools, what was Bill Gates's underlying principle, and Steve Jobs' underlying principle too, although with a very different approach of a closed system as opposed to the open system of Microsoft, and with a high priority on design and fonts and art and graphics that of course differentiated Apple in the early days from all of the IBM PC clones that existed in the 1980s and 90s. Does that answer your question? Other things to pop back up and not drill down that rabbit hole too much. Other things that are required, certainly management experience. I recommend that no one start a company until they've got no less than 3 to 5 years of management experience, which probably means 8 to 10 years of work experience. Too many people think that because they see a headline of, a unicorn and someone that made $1 billion, that they can do it. I literally had someone call me up last year who had just graduated college, and he asked me if I could coach him to be a billionaire by next year. Wow. And of course, he didn't have enough understanding and experience to know that had never happened in the history of the world, unless you were born a Saudi prince and inherited an oil field, right? We all think because of the press showing the flash in the pan companies like FTX and, Sam Bankman-Fried, who was a billionaire on paper, but really didn't create any value or sustainability, and will no doubt end up in jail because of fraud, right? And so that's the other extreme, but it takes a lot of work and preparation. I think people should be preparing 10 years before they launch a company, getting experience and learning on other people's dime. Of course, bigger companies can afford to educate you more, but they may not teach you as broad a set of experience, because your job in that company is going to be a narrower slice of things, because you're working as part of a larger team. So that's another thing. I think creativity is important. Again, these all don't have to come from the same person necessarily, but usually a founder is a creative person. They're willing to sort of reject the status quo and say, I think it can be done a better way, and sometimes throw out basic assumptions that industries have run on for years, and then totally disrupt those industries, as Elon Musk did in both electric vehicles, replacing internal combustion engines, as well as SpaceX. A long time ago, I heard that he had cut the cost of getting a pound of payload into orbit that NASA and other companies did by a factor of 10. So I mean, we're talking about a huge leap forward. And sometimes that's necessary to get people to adopt a new product or service or way of doing things and take the risk. So you've got to be, willing to fail. And that's an Elon Musk too. He says, if you're not failing, you're not, pushing the envelope enough. You're not really innovating, right?
You're not taking a risk.
Yeah. So you've got to let people fail. And as long as they learn from their failure and don't fail too big, that's the right culture. I call the ideal culture a Darwinian meritocracy, because, a company needs to constantly adapt and grow. due to the outside macroeconomic environment, due to the competitive landscape, and due to its own growth and changes as it gets bigger and needs to streamline and refine and specialize and systematize and do more things. Let me think if I can think of any of those others in my article.
Is execution is important? Because I know a lot of, I met, a lot of presidents, a lot of CEOs, they got a great ideas, they got a great, approach to a lot of things, but, where I see the struggle is when they're trying to execute that idea, to get the other side.
Yeah, and that's a big myth also propagated by the press, that there's such a thing called a $1 billion idea. There's no such thing as a $1 billion idea, and I can prove that mathematically, okay? Why? Because an idea cannot be patented. Only the way of implementing something can be patented. Yeah. And so if everyone can steal it, it's an idea, it can be stolen by anyone else and replicated. There's no way you're going to have differentiation. You're going to have high marketing costs. You're going to have high sales costs, and you're going to have 100 clones, a year after you enter the marketplace. And so there's really no such thing as a $1 billion idea. A company is in the innovation business, which is constantly generating new ideas and pushing the envelope forward continuously. Not to reference Tesla too much, but they supposedly put all their patents in the public domain, which is the reverse of what most companies do about these things, because of Elon Musk's firm belief in constant innovation. Which the Japanese call Kaizen, but they got from the American J. Walter Deming, who kind of helped rebuild the Japanese economy after World War II and created the principles that made Toyota and some of the other Japanese car companies very successful by constantly innovating in little ways and looking for the ideas on the shop floor and from the customer, not having top-down driven innovation and expecting all your C-level people to come up with the creative ideas. Everyone in the corporation should be asked to and expected to provide ideas for continuous improvement.
Very interesting. Good stuff. So let's talk about the other area of your expertise, Bob. I want to make sure that I capture this as well. Scaling a business or scaling an organization, that's one of the other area of your expertise. What are we all just coming from with the economic time for last few years? Companies, business leaders, my colleagues, we are looking to scale back the companies. Even though it's tough times, you want to scale up. You need to, bring a lot of people in, whatever they got to do. So what do you see some of those challenges when somebody trying to scale a company or somebody trying to grow a company could get back to the revenue levels we had it before COVID so we can sustain? So where do you see some of the challenges, or what do you think people got to do to scale?
Yeah, pretty much everyone has heard that about 80% of startups will fail. And that's a startup that's trying to do something new and innovative. Obviously, it's not someone that buys a McDonald's franchise or hangs out a shingle to sell their freelance services. I wouldn't call those startups. I'd just call those solopreneurs or home businesses, right? But we all hear that 80% statistic. What most people don't know is that only 1 in 400 companies will ever reach 10 million in sales, and only 1 in 6,300 companies will reach 100 million in sales.
Wow.
I've gotten two.
That's a very small number.
Right. It's a tiny fraction. And everyone thinks it's easy. Like I said, they read the headlines of, one person doing this every week. And so they think it's easy. But of course, that's 50 people a year out of 5 million businesses that launched in a given year. Right. So it's a tiny, tiny fraction. And so the point there is that scaling is actually much, much harder than starting a business, because the skill sets and the breadth of skill sets and the shift in mentality of management and operations is completely different. And the reason many, many founders, I think the figure is over 50%, will get sort of pushed aside or fired by the venture capitalists that come in and get a majority share in the company, is because they can't shift from that innovative, fingers in every pie product development mentality to a mentality of leadership and management and systemization and running the business by the numbers, and a 50% of a CEO's time is going to recruiting and keeping and nurturing people, right? And so that's not for everyone. I mean, a lot of founders ought to stay in the R&D lab or where they came from and run that, because the business will grow 5 or 10 times faster with a professional manager coming in. Very few people, and usually they survive through having 50% ownership or more, like Bill Gates and Michael Dell and Larry Ellison and all these others, because they bootstrapped longer and they brought in capital later. They were able to hold on to a larger portion of the company. And they also grew slower because they didn't bring in capital, which gave them the runway to learn of how to be a better manager and leader and how to re-engineer the corporation and the organization's development as it needed to shift in. I mean, Bill Gates wasn't an overnight success, as everyone thought. I mean, he was running that company, Microsoft, for 5 years, I think it was, before he sold MS-DOS to IBM and created the big opportunity that made Microsoft a massive success, right? So we all see the headline and think that, happiness and success happened overnight. But, I'm not aware of any situation where there wasn't 5 or 10 years of learning prior to that to prepare to allow that to happen.
Yeah, there's so many examples that people, even 20, 25 years they gone through before they got successful, right? So there's no overnight success. It's all just hard work over the longer period of time.
Yeah, and that's why founders over the age of 40 have a much higher success rate than founders under the age of 40, because they're coming in with a bigger variety of experience and world knowledge and network and all those other things that can greatly contribute to success.
Very interesting. So let's talk about a little bit of your background, Bob. You built the companies before. It was 2 companies or 3 companies you built before?
Well, I founded 6 companies and sold 4. The short version of my background is I started as a technologist for 8 years, the last 3 years of which I was chief technical officer and VP of engineering at what today is called Thomson Reuters. Back then it was called Thomson Financial Services. And I ran the Skunk Works and all the product development. So I still consider myself sort of an inventor, product development, innovator guy, right? But wanting to move on and do better things and bigger things, I needed to start founding companies. So I founded HomeView in 1989, and that was the first high definition virtual touring company for residential real estate. Did a strategic, got some angel money. I had invested a good deal of money from the Thompson buyout that I had earned as the startup capital or the seed money. And then we brought in some angels for $1 million. And then I closed a $34 million deal with IBM's venture group and grew that. We grew that to 156 million in sales within 18 months after the launch. Although there was a couple of years of secret stealth development when we were, building all of the technology. Lots of that has been patented that we kept as trade secret back then. And I've got a little side business of doing expert witness work, on some of those things that we invented and people later tried to patent when we had already done it because we decided to keep it as trade secret. So that, the first 14 years was a technologist. I'm sorry, first 8 years. And then 14 years, I was a serial entrepreneur. And now for 20 years, I have been advising and coaching and helping companies scale as a consultant, installing the management systems and of course, training CEOs and entrepreneurs as well. So we install strategic planning, dashboards, what I call PAMs, which stands for the Performance Accountability and Merit System. That's a collection of management best practices from management science and from sort of the top gurus on business and leadership and marketing and sales and everything else. That is a foundational set of principles that unfortunately our universities and our MBA programs don't teach. that I think are so proven and so fundamental. An example is Peter Drucker's management by objective, which is just one form of a goal setting system. And there's enormous amounts of research that shows companies that do that have as much as 56% greater productivity or value creation in the organization, yet most companies don't even do it, right? So, it's staring you in the face as every successful company ever does this. Yeah. And most companies don't. And so, that's a 1 hour course. Yeah. How to have a good cadence of goal setting monthly.
Well, I just looked at your dashboard on your website. I think that's very, very important. A lot of companies, business leaders I talk to, we don't have a dashboard. There's nothing, there's nothing to measure. And especially to bring it out in such a way that the way you build the dashboards, it tells you everything just by looking at just quick dashboard where you are at any given time, right? So I think those are key areas that leaders got to take a look.
Absolutely. Dashboards and KPIs are critical to get beyond the $1 million level, especially. And, every department with more than 5 people, as my rule of thumb, should have its own dashboard, because you can't improve what you don't measure. I'm quoting Peter Drucker again. So you've got, literally you can't do it, right? How would you know you improved it if you're not measuring it, right?
Yeah.
But the art and the magic is in the design of what those KPIs are, the key performance indicators, because people will game the system if there isn't a balance of them. If all you do is tell them to create widgets, they're going to maximize widgets, especially if they get a bonus based on how many widgets there are. But then the cost will go up, and they'll get parts by FedEx, and they'll double the cost of a part because they wanted to produce the widgets. And so your profitability tanks. And so you got to have a balance between unit economics and financial measures and quality measures, and of course productivity, so that the system isn't gamed. Yeah. So I recommend a corporate dashboard as soon as you hit about 7 people in an organization, and then a department dashboard for any individual department that has more than 5 people in it.
Wow. Very interesting. And where does the process fits in, Bob, in this, all of these things, right? So no matter what you do, not only once you got to do it, you're going to need a process to do it over and over, because you want that consistent result over the time, right? So how does the process kind of, tie into all those items together?
Yeah, out of the 6 systems in my Airtight Management system, process management and optimization, is system 5. And you must systematize everything to be able to go beyond $1 million or $2 million. And there are at least 4 processes at the highest level that are needed in every department. And here's a great little model that's easy to think about. You got to do it. So you need the process for doing it. Let's say that's customer service. That's your customer service manual. Then you got to learn to hire the right people to do it. What's their personality? What's the experience they need? Then you got to have the process to train them and verify that they're trained. And then you got to have the process to management, which ties into dashboards and metrics to manage that department by the numbers, right? Because that enables you to move from goal setting and MBO style management to management by exception, which is the same as running a business by the numbers. And that gives you early warning indicators that problems are happening or opportunities are happening, which is the key thing to concentrate management time and attention for the coming month or quarter.
Yeah, and also give you insight where to make adjustment, right? If you're not doing very well, it's going to give you the indication, and you can make those adjustments as you go along with it.
Yeah, if you have a good dashboard, which I always make a timeline of numbers, not colors and graphs and fancy things, because what's called the ink to paper ratio is terrible on those. And there's not a lot of information when you make it pretty graphs and colors. That has its point, but that's a report, not a dashboard technically, right? A dashboard is the numbers where you can see trends. And as you pointed out, that gives you that early warning that things, if I can get a 1-page dashboard on a company, I can say, I'm staying on this Caribbean beach for another month.
Yeah.
Because not only do I know the company is okay
Yeah.
today,
Yeah.
I know the trending of all the key indicators and numbers. So your dashboard is the canary in the coal mine that will give you early warning and even let you know about things that are happening outside the company because you'll see the impact very early in the metrics.
Yeah. And the companies who had this kind of, dashboards or this kind of trend watching, these are the company did very well during the COVID time because there was no one-to-one. You were not sitting in the office, right? So these company who deployed that kind of technology, my insights has been that, these company did very, very well. They managed the people very well, no matter where they were working from, because they could just monitor the trends and dashboards.
Yeah, absolutely. And to go back to your earlier question about, the opportunity to create a business in a recession or a downtime, there's a maxim around that it's a good time to start a business. And yes, I'm a believer in that. The not only are there more business formations because there are huge amounts of layoffs of people that have severance packages or have to make themselves a job, but the competition is typically pulling back on the training and consulting and coaching it needs, and basically pulling its head, of a turtle, in the shell to protect itself and to protect its core employees. And so the result is there's lots more business to be garnered at a smaller marketing and sales cost during a recession in a lot of business. And then, of course, there's no rule that applies to everyone. And it's going to vary a little bit by what's happening in the industry. If the rising tide floats all boats, right? So if the economy is going up, and capital is cheap, it's pretty easy to start a business. Mm-hmm. But you're going to have lots of people starting businesses, so you're going to have lots of competition, right? If the economy is not so good, there's going to be fewer competitors, and you're figuring out that business with less competition. Yes, it might be harder to raise a little capital and you might have to bootstrap a little longer, but the odds are that when the economy improves again, you've now eliminated you've de-risked the business, right? You've got your product market fit. When you're doing your product development in stealth mode, it doesn't matter what the economy is. If you can fund your product development with sweat equity or with founders, founder friends and family money, right? So you've got very low expenses, and that's a great time to start in a recession because you're going to be ready to launch as the economy turns around.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. There's so much to draw from your wisdoms, Bob. There's so much experience, so much wisdom. Did you ever, growing up, what got you so interested in a building corporation, helping business leaders, Bob? Did you always wanted to do that, or what triggered?
It says right on my LinkedIn profile that I had 4 businesses before I left high school. I was a ham radio operator, and I've always been sort of a serial hobbyist. I've had like 20 hobbies in my career because I get bored with things and I learn them and I like the learning phase, and then I move on and do something else. And so I had an antenna manufacturing company that sold antennas to ham radio operators by mail order, for the last 2 years of high school. And, of course, I did all the other things that kids did, with a paper route and snow shoveling, and bought my own lawnmower and paid my dad back to have a lawnmower business and all that sort of stuff. And it was in the blood a little bit. I mean, I think anyone can be an entrepreneur. I don't think it has to be in your blood, but it certainly was from my father. He was an entrepreneur as well. He started many businesses.
Wow, very interesting. Yeah, no, we can go on for many different topics we can talk about, but I just want to respect your time as well. Where can people find you? How can they connect with you, Bob?
entrepreneurshipu.com is my training for earlier stage companies and startups. Okay. And airtightmgt.com is my site for more mature companies that have reached some amount of product market fit and are getting ready to scale. And info at airtightmgt.com, is an email address that we put out in there in the public for inquiries and stuff like that. But if you Google, Robert Norton or Bob Norton, CEO, Airtight, you'll see that I have, hundreds of articles posted. I've got a blog at Entrepreneurship University and at ceobootcamp.us, where I have hundreds of articles that are searchable by keywords. So you can look at, marketing and sales and finance and raising capital and management and lots of stuff. I might be approaching 200 articles on that now.
Wow. So much information. Definitely, business leader we're watching, or business owner we're watching, I'll definitely recommend go check out your websites. I'm going to include link to those websites below this video as well, so they can click a button and go check it out. And definitely so much to learn from your wisdom, your experience as well. It's much easier to have that, knowledge and just, go and apply in your business and grow your companies. So I'll definitely recommend people to go reach out to you for discussion as well. I learned so much from our discussion. I'm definitely business leaders who are trying to figure things out. Don't spend time just trying to figure out. Reach out to you, have a discussion, and learn and scale the companies from there.
Yeah, I like to say I've got a lot of miles on my chassis, and they weren't all easy miles. I mean, I wouldn't tell anyone any of it was easy. You've got to expect there's never a straight path between an idea and creating a company, because you require hundreds of ideas. And
well, there's a lot of blind spots, right? I don't have all the expertise because there's so many blind spots. That's where we need experts like you or with the wisdom. And so first of all, show us what the blind spot, and then help us how to get over some of those blind spots.
Yeah, and every entrepreneur needs a coach or multiple coaches as they grow the company at different phases, and a mentor or more. I had several mentors along the way that taught me different things, from work ethic to programming and other things that I learned along the way. So you've got to seek out that and be what's called self-actualized. You've got to be a constant learner, and you've got to create a culture in your organization of constant learning. I just finished reading a report by one of the big four consulting companies. And something like 75% of people want development and training to be part of their job. And that will actually, it's one of the biggest things that keeps them from leaving for another job, because not only do they increase their value in the career and get appreciated more in the organization, but they know they have a career path and their earnings can continue to go up over time. Yeah. And they'll get change and responsibility. And of course, the best people, want to learn and want to have challenge. Contrary to popular belief, salary isn't the number one motivator of people. That's number three. Being appreciated and having the opportunity to grow and learn are number one and two.
Very interesting. Good. They definitely, those are many different areas. I think that's what keeps the people in the jobs. But well, thank you so much for your time. I will learn so much, and I'm sure the business leaders who are watching, they learn so much from our discussion as well, and they should go check out your site and connect with you and go and learn and scale your companies. Thank you so much for your time. It was enjoyable discussion about.
Thank you for your work and getting good stuff out there for everybody. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, Bob.